The HOA president actually called the cops on my floating party. Can you believe that? She had no clue what I was carrying in my pocket, just one folded piece of paper that would flip her whole world upside down. There we were, 25 of my closest friends, chilling on my pontoon boat under the Saturday sun, Lake Silverpine glittering around us like a dream. Music was playing, beers were cracked open, and the good vibes were flowing. It was everything you want in a summer afternoon, carefree, loud, and full of laughter. Then she showed up, Pamela Warwick, the self-declared queen of Crest Haven. The woman who once fined a 10-year-old for chaining his bike to a street lamp because it violated community aesthetics. She came storming down the sandy bank in her ridiculous heels, hair sprayed into a helmet so stiff it could survive a tornado, screeching like we'd started a riot on the water. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" she bellowed, face twisted like she'd just sucked on a lemon. Her husband was parked up by their golf cart, mumbling frantically into his phone like someone trying to cover up something way bigger than a lake party. Before I could even get a word in, she was waving her phone around like a sword, yelling about HOA Rule 17.3, something about unauthorized gatherings and noise levels on community-adjacent waterways. You'd think we were hosting Coachella out there. She dialed 911 like she had them on speed dial, and sure enough, within 15 minutes, Officer Nathan Powell pulled into the gravel lot. The guy looked so done with life, I almost felt bad for him. "HOA calls again," he muttered, stepping out of his cruiser like this was his third visit that day. Powell wasn't a bad guy. Early 30s, worn down from babysitting neighborhood politics, and probably just hoping for a peaceful shift. He scanned our group. No drugs, no fights, just adults enjoying a Saturday. Still, duty called. "Ryan," he said with a reluctant sigh, "I gotta shut this down. Disturbing the peace. $200 fine." From the shore, Pamela smirked like she'd just won the lottery. Her lips curled in that tight, smug smile she wore whenever she knew she was ruining someone's day. I crushed the side of my beer can slightly in frustration, but held my tongue. "Disturbing whose peace exactly?" I asked calmly. "We're in the middle of the lake, not blasting a rave in someone's backyard." Powell glanced back at her, visibly annoyed as she mimed legalese at her husband like a bad courtroom drama. "Her husband's got connections," he whispered, scribbling on the ticket. "My boss golfs with him every Sunday. It's just easier to issue the fine than get dragged into politics." Derek, my best friend since college, wasn't as patient. "She's basically fining us for existing at this point," he said loudly, making sure Pamela heard every word. She strutted back to her golf cart like a villain exiting the scene, only pausing to hiss, "The lake deal's still safe, right?" to her husband. That's when I noticed Susan Harper watching from her porch 2 houses down. Last month, Pamela had fined her $500 for a tree branch that crossed 6 inches over the property line. Susan knew exactly what kind of tyrant we were dealing with. She gave me a subtle nod, solidarity in silence. This wasn't her first run-in with Pamela either. She once told me Pamela fined an old fisherman for trespassing on HOA water, even though the lake was public. But bullies like Pamela only win when people back down, and backing down isn't exactly my style. That night, something told me to double-check the bylaws. I dug through old files, backups, PDFs, everything I had. Turns out, Lake Silverpine wasn't even under HOA jurisdiction. It was part of a federal watershed system that predated Crest Haven's founding by decades. Pamela had no authority over it. None. And the best part? I had the documents to prove it. Emails, maps, legal descriptions, all of it saved in my digital vault. A habit from college coding days that was finally paying off. By Monday morning, Pamela was already on damage control. She plastered bright yellow flyers all over the neighborhood. Uninspected lake gatherings are prohibited. HOA board approval required. 48-hour notice. $50 fee. Derek texted me pictures with a few creative suggestions for where she could stick her fake rules. But the part that really stuck with me? As Officer Powell handed me the ticket that Saturday, Pamela leaned in and whispered, "I'm not done with you yet." Well, neither was I. Tuesday night came fast. The emergency HOA meeting was jam-packed. I walked into a room filled with tight faces, crossed arms, and thin smiles. Pamela stood at the podium like she was ready to deliver a guilty verdict at a war crimes tribunal. Her PowerPoint glowed behind her, big bold red text reading, "Protecting our community standards." She cleared her throat. Neighbors, she began, syrupy sweet and dripping with faux concern. We need to talk about the growing problem of certain individuals treating our community like their personal amusement park. Her eyes locked onto me across the room. No hiding who she meant. She clicked to the next slide, an edited, blurry photo of my boat party, cropped to make it look like a rave. Lake Silverpine is a precious resource. We cannot allow it to be abused by those who ignore the rules, she said, her nails clacking the podium for emphasis. Effective immediately, she declared. All lake activities must be submitted for HOA board review with at least 48 hours notice and a $50 processing fee. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some confused, some annoyed, most too exhausted to fight back. Because that's how Pamela worked. She didn't rule with laws, she ruled with fatigue. She wore people down until they stopped resisting. But not this time. Because I had that one piece of paper, the one she didn't know I had when she called the cops. The one that made her face go pale and her voice catch in her throat when I pulled it from my pocket. Officer Powell had seen it too, and even he took a step back, whispering, "That's impossible. How did you get that?" I smiled. The most powerful woman in Crest Haven had just realized she wasn't in control anymore. And that was just the beginning. What came next hit harder than I expected. Pamela paused for dramatic effect, then delivered her bombshell. I've received troubling reports about certain individuals using these lake gatherings for unsavory activities. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. The pointed glance she threw in my direction said it all. By Wednesday morning, the damage had spread like a virus. An email had been circulated anonymously to everyone in Crest Haven. Subject line, Concerned Neighbor Alert. It claimed there were credible eyewitness accounts of drug dealing happening at the lake gatherings, complete with fake statements and sinister warnings about the type of crowd I was supposedly attracting. My phone buzzed constantly. One by one, neighbors began backing away from me. Invitations were canceled. Conversations were cut short. People I used to wave to at the mailbox suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes. The guy who jogged by my house every morning actually crossed the street to avoid me. The weekend barbecue I was looking forward to? Now suddenly just for family. Pamela had turned Crest Haven's grapevine into a precision weapon, painting me as a neighborhood pariah in less than 24 hours. It was ruthless and calculated. I paced my living room, pulse pounding, fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against my thigh. I was mentally scrambling for a plan when Derek showed up, coffee in hand and fire in his eyes. "I've been tailing her," he said without even sitting down. He flipped open his phone and showed me a series of photos. Pamela, her husband, and a third man in a dark suit were meeting by the lake every evening. They were talking in hushed tones, pointing at those barrels Jake had mentioned. In every photo, Pamela looked tense, her usual icy composure visibly cracking. "She's not just on a power trip," I said slowly. "The pieces starting to align. She's hiding something." Then came the next wave. Pamela took her campaign to the sidewalks, going door to door with a clipboard in hand. It was a petition to maintain community standards and safety, code for getting me officially labeled as a threat to the neighborhood. I watched her from my window, her smile saccharine as she stirred up fear and gathered signatures. When she reached Tom's house, I saw him hesitate. He glanced toward my house, conflicted, before reluctantly scribbling his name. Later he'd tell me, quietly and full of regret, "She fined my mailbox last month. I can't afford another fine." But just when it felt like Pamela had all the power, Susan showed up at my back door. Nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder, she slipped inside. "I work at First National," she whispered, lowering herself into one of my kitchen chairs. "Last year, I processed a contract. Pamela's husband, he signed a deal with a waste management company. It's about lake disposal rights." Then she dropped the bomb. "Director Hargrove, Federal Lake Authority. He's the one who actually governs Silverpine, not the HOA. Pamela's bluffing." That changed everything. I spent Friday making calls, organizing every shred of evidence. When I finally got through to the Lake Authority, they confirmed it all. Pamela's HOA had no jurisdiction over Silverpine. None. "Ma'am's been calling us nonstop," the clerk told me with a tired sigh. "Trying to get enforcement powers." Director Hargrove told her to pound sand. Federal waterway means federal rules. That night, Officer Powell knocked on my door again. He looked even more drained than usual. "I need to ask you about these drug allegations," he said. though his voice told me he already knew it was nonsense. Pamela had been flooding the station with complaints, demanding a full investigation. I let him search. He found nothing, of course. Before leaving, he paused in the doorway. Between you and me, she's pulled this before. Remember that fisherman she fined last year? He fought it. Ended up in jail for trespassing. Charges were dropped, but his reputation never recovered. Be careful. That night, I sat alone, staring into the darkness, wondering if it was worth continuing the fight. But then I remembered that little girl with her fishing rod, crying as her mom led her away from the dock. I thought of Tom, bullied into submission over a mailbox fine, and Susan, still bearing emotional scars from Pamela's petty tyranny. College bullies never stopped us, Derek had said earlier. He was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. Pamela had declared war on the entire community. By Monday morning, her next strike landed with force. A certified letter arrived, a $1,000 fine for willful misuse of community resources and creating a public nuisance. The HOA letterhead practically dripped with intimidation, threatening liens on my property if I didn't comply within 30 days. But Pamela wasn't stopping at scare tactics. That afternoon, Powell came back. She's filed a formal complaint, he muttered. Claims you're operating an unlicensed commercial enterprise on federal water. I need to see your lake permit. I handed him my basic boating permit. He sighed. This is valid, he said reluctantly. But for gatherings over 10 people, she's insisting you need special authorization from the lake authority. My boss is leaning on me. I'd suggest you get that paperwork. Fast. Then Tuesday came, and Pamela took her performance to new heights. There she was on Channel 7's morning show, sitting across from the anchor with that picture-perfect smile and her favorite prop, righteous concern. We've had an increase in vandalism and disruptive activity at the lake, she said solemnly. And as HOA president, I must protect our property values and our children. She practically oozed sincerity. Then came the kicker, a veiled threat wrapped in passive-aggressive sweetness. Certain individuals believe they're above the rules, but they'll be out of Crest Haven soon enough. By Wednesday, my breaking point arrived. I was walking near the lake when I saw a group of kids by the dock, staring sadly at a brand new sign. Lake closed. HOA authorization required. One little girl, no older than 8, clutched a fishing pole in both hands, tears welling in her eyes. But Mommy said we could fish today, she whispered. Her mother, confused and defeated, led her away. That was it. I spent the rest of the night crafting a detailed, bulletproof email to Director Hargrove, complete with photos, timestamps, and documentation. My request was simple: formal authorization for community gatherings on Lake Silverpine, signed by the one person whose authority actually mattered. I triple-backed up the email, enabled read receipts, and locked everything down. She won't catch me slipping, I told Derek. He just nodded. By Thursday, Pamela was flailing. She hand-delivered a letter threatening legal action for defamation and obstruction of HOA operations. But it reeked of desperation, like someone going all in with nothing left to lose. She's scared, Susan said after reading it. That lake deal must be worth a fortune. And Pamela was running out of time. My husband had gone to a few HOA meetings lately and noticed something strange. 3 different trucks showed up near those sealed barrels by the lake just yesterday. None of them had local plates. All were industrial-looking rigs, the kind you don't see unless heavy-duty business is involved. Whatever they were dumping, one thing was certain: it definitely wasn't fish food. But Friday morning brought the moment I'd been waiting for: absolute vindication. Director Hargrove himself responded to my inquiries, and not only did he confirm that the HOA had absolutely zero jurisdiction over Lake Silverpine, but he expressed real concern that someone was falsely claiming federal authority, something that could carry serious legal consequences. Even better, he officially approved my request for a permit and said he would send a signed authorization, one that explicitly allowed public gatherings at the lake. His words were clear and powerful. No jumped-up HOA president is going to privatize federal waters on my watch. But Pamela wasn't about to go down quietly. That very evening, I watched as she hammered a fresh sign into the ground by the lake's edge, something ominous about standoffs and criminal trespassing. The sheer boldness of it made me laugh out loud. It was like watching a suburban conquistador try to claim land she had no right to. Derek texted me a photo of it with a caption, "Pamela Jr. says, no joy allowed." We laughed, But the truth underneath wasn't funny. She was getting dangerous. That night, I got to work. Friday was for preparing. Monday's HOA meeting was going to be a showdown, and I planned to walk in there like a gunslinger armed with federal backing. I printed every email, copied every document, backed up my files in triplicate. The weekend passed with an eerie tension hanging in the air. On Saturday evening, I walked by Pamela's porch. She and her husband were huddled over a pile of paperwork, gesturing animatedly. I caught just a snippet as I passed, Pamela saying, "If that permit shows up, we need Bill's tech guy ready." Then Sunday night came the bombshell. Susan sent me a text that changed everything. It was a photo, a bank document that showed a $1 million contract between Pamela's husband and a company called Integrated Waste Solutions. The contract's coordinates matched Lake Silverpine exactly. The service listed? Discreet disposal. This was what she was protecting. Susan's message was blunt. If the feds find out, they're both going to prison. Monday's meeting felt like a funeral. Tension blanketed the room. Then, unexpectedly, Susan stood up. She clutched the podium like it was a lifeline. Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "Ryan's got a point about the lake," she began. The room turned, every head snapping toward her, including Pamela, whose perfect smile stiffened into a frozen mask. Susan's voice cracked with emotion as she spoke. 2 years ago, Pamela fined me $500 because a tree branch extended 6 inches over the property line. I paid it because I was scared, but I'm done being scared. She went on, telling story after story. Residents fined for mailbox fonts, for grass that was half an inch too tall. Even a grieving widow charged $200 because her late husband's car stayed in their driveway for a few weeks too long. "But here's what really matters," Susan said, her hands shaking as she pulled out a folder. "I work at First National Bank. Last year, I processed paperwork for Pamela's husband. There's a $1 million contract with a waste management company, one that gives them rights to dump at Lake Silverpine." The room erupted in murmurs, people connecting the dots. Those mysterious barrels, the sudden lake closures, Pamela's relentless control. Her face turned from red to white. She gripped the microphone like it was her last anchor. "These are baseless accusations from a disgruntled resident," Pamela muttered. But her voice had lost its edge. That's when I stood up. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. I reached into my jacket and said, "Speaking of baseless," I pulled out Director Hargrove's signed permit, holding it high so the federal seal caught the light. "Let's talk about your fake authority over Lake Silverpine." Gasps filled the room. I continued, my voice loud and clear. "This is from Director James Hargrove, the actual authority over Lake Silverpine. His signature overrides every so-called rule you've tried to enforce." Pamela's face twisted. "Hargrove? That can't be real." I stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Really? Then why have you been calling the Federal Lake Authority for months, begging them for enforcement power? Why did Director Hargrove personally tell you to, and I quote, pound sand?" The crowd lost it. Some people laughed. Others gasped. The momentum had shifted. I read aloud from Hargrove's email. "Any HOA claiming authority over federal waterways is committing fraud punishable by fines and potential criminal charges." Pamela's carefully built kingdom was crumbling right before everyone's eyes. Then something amazing happened. Tom, the quiet neighbor she'd bullied over his mailbox, stood up and started clapping. "That's the lake boss's signature, all right. I've seen it on fishing licenses." Pamela tried one last desperate spin, turning to the room with wide, fake concerned eyes. "This is a forgery. Ryan is trying to undermine the safety of this community." But she never finished that thought. Half the room had already pulled out their phones, searching for Director Hargrove's public signature. It matched mine exactly. The exodus began. First one neighbor walking out, then another. Then it became a flood. Pamela stood frozen at the podium like a ship captain watching her vessel sink. Her perfect hair was in disarray now, her hands trembling as she ran them through it over and over. "You don't understand," she shouted into the vanishing crowd. "I'm protecting you. The property values, the community standards, the illegal waste dumping." Susan cut in, her voice sharp and unwavering. "The contract your husband signed to turn our kids' fishing spot into a toxic dump." Pamela's eyes went wild. She looked between us like a cornered animal. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clacking against the linoleum in a panic-driven staccato. As she passed, she hissed at me, "This isn't over. My lawyer will destroy you for slander." I didn't flinch. I just held up my phone, showing her the recording of the entire meeting. "Looking forward to it, Pamela," I said. "I'm sure Director Hargrove will love hearing about your claims of authority over his lake." By Tuesday, it was all over. Neighbors who once avoided me were stopping by to apologize. Some even brought coffee. Others shared their own stories, stories of intimidation, fines, and fear. Pamela's reign was done. The truth had finally cut through the lies. And Lake Silverpine was free again. Not everyone was ready to celebrate. The canceled barbecue invitations didn't magically reappear, and several neighbors still made a point of crossing the street when they saw me. Pamela's poison had seeped so deeply into the social fabric of Crest Haven that one community meeting wasn't going to cure it overnight. That kind of damage doesn't just vanish. "Give them time," Susan said when she stopped by on Tuesday evening. "Pamela had them convinced you were a drug dealer. That kind of fear doesn't just disappear." She paused for a moment, her lips tightening before adding with a grim smile, "But I've got more now. More bank documents, specific dates, payment amounts, even email exchanges about keeping the lake thing quiet. We're not just whispering about corruption anymore. We're building a case that's going to bury her." Wednesday brought the inevitable, a thick, official-looking letter from Pamela's attorney threatening defamation charges unless I issued a public apology and full retraction. I couldn't help but laugh as I read it aloud to Derek over a couple of beers in my backyard. She wants me to apologize for telling the truth? That's rich. But Derek wasn't laughing. His eyes were focused across the street on Pamela's house, his beer untouched. "She's planning something," he said quietly. "I've been watching her place. The lights stay on late, and there's been a steady stream of people coming and going. Yesterday, some tech-looking guy was there for hours, lots of computer equipment being brought in and out." That made me pause. I remembered something her husband had mentioned once, needing Bill's tech guy. Whatever they were plotting, it involved technology. And that worried me more than any threat from a lawyer. By Thursday, I had assembled what could only be described as a war council. Susan came armed with her financial documents. Derek had his surveillance notes and a timeline of Pamela's suspicious visitors. 3 other neighbors joined us too. People who had been fined or harassed by Pamela's HOA over the most ridiculous, arbitrary violations. We gathered around my dining room table, spreading out evidence like generals preparing for battle. "She's got maybe 2 weeks before her husband's contract renewal is due," Susan explained, pointing to key dates on the documents. "If the feds catch wind before then, the whole thing collapses. Her husband's company loses millions." That's when it hit me. Pamela wasn't just trying to hold on to her HOA power. She was shielding a criminal enterprise, one that would collapse the moment federal investigators took a closer look at Lake Silverpine. And I had just shown her a federal permit, practically daring her to panic. As everyone left that night, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: hope. Real, cautious hope. But as I closed the door, I saw something that froze my blood cold. Across the street, Pamela stood in her upstairs home office, bent over what looked like a printer, yanking out sheet after sheet. Even from that distance, I could see her lips moving, frantic, muttering. Then she looked up. Our eyes met. She smiled. Not her usual rehearsed president of the HOA smile, but something darker, something calculated. She held up one of the freshly printed pages like it was a trophy, then slipped it into her bag, her ink-stained fingers twitching with anticipation. In that moment, I knew. She was going to frame me. And whatever was on those papers, whatever lie she had cooked up, it was about to blow my world apart. The knock came at 6 a.m. Friday morning. 3 sharp, authoritative raps that sent my heart into overdrive. Officer Powell stood at the door with 2 other officers flanking him. His expression was a cocktail of professionalism and quiet disgust. "Ryan Caldwell," he said, voice clipped, "you're under arrest for falsifying federal documents." Behind him, I saw Pamela's curtains twitch. She was watching, of course, soaking it all in. "What are you talking about?" I asked, even as the cold metal of handcuffs snapped around my wrists. Powell held up a printed email. It looked official, perfectly formatted, complete with a federal letterhead, bureaucratic language, and a fabricated case number. "Lake Authority says your permit's a fake." Pamela's husband's buddy fast-tracked it straight to the prosecutor's office. I stared at the paper. "Somebody faked this," I said, already connecting the dots. Pamela's husband has connections. He, save it for the lawyer. Powell cut me off, though his eyes softened for a moment. As he guided my head into the back seat of the cruiser, he whispered, Pamela's pulled this kind of thing before. Keep your mouth shut. Wait. The drive to county lockup felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. As Crest Haven passed by through the tinted cruiser windows, I knew Pamela was already spinning the story, already painting herself as the neighborhood savior, already convincing people that I was the danger. The cell they put me in was bleak, gray concrete, a steel toilet, a metal bench that made sleeping on a floor sound luxurious. But what haunted me wasn't the cell. It was the view. Through a tiny window, I could just see a slice of Lake Silverpine, glowing golden in the morning light. The same lake that started this all. The same lake we tried to protect. I thought about the warning from Jake, the barrels. I thought about Susan's determination, Derek's loyalty, and I realized Pamela hadn't just tried to frame me. She was trying to erase all of us. The booking officer said I had 24 hours before they had to formally charge me or let me go. I was willing to bet Pamela was using every second to solidify her frame job. The hours dragged by like injured animals. I dozed fitfully, startled awake every time footsteps passed by. At one point, I found myself drifting back to high school. Bullies trying to push me out of the computer lab because I didn't look like I belonged. Back then, I beat them with smarts, with facts, with resilience. But this wasn't some schoolyard feud. This was a full-blown legal ambush, meticulously planned, surgically executed. Around hour 18, a sparrow landed on my window ledge, pecking at invisible crumbs. Such a small thing, but it reminded me the world outside was still moving. The lake still existed. The fight wasn't over. Finally, at hour 20, I got my phone call. Derek answered on the first ring, his voice hoarse with guilt and panic. Ryan, Jesus Christ, I'm so sorry. I should have seen this coming. I should have done something. I tried to calm him down, but he just barreled ahead. I've been calling everyone. The permit is real, 100% legit. Director Hargrove's office confirmed it 3 times. They're furious someone used their letterhead. There's an investigation starting already. That was good news, but it didn't spring me from the cell. Not yet. Oh, and Pamela's throwing a party tonight, Derek added, venom in his voice. A community safety celebration. She's celebrating getting the dangerous criminal off the streets. The final 4 hours were the hardest. I just stared out that tiny window, watching that sliver of the lake, remembering everything that brought me here. The backyard party. Powell's tired eyes. Susan's tears. Pamela's trembling hands when I mentioned Director Hargrove. Somewhere out there, kids were being told they couldn't fish in their own lake. Somewhere, Tom still feared speaking out about his mailbox fine. And somewhere, Pamela was raising a glass, toasting her success, convinced she'd finally won. But she hadn't. Not yet. The sparrow returned to my window ledge just as the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and gold. It sat there quietly, its tiny chest rising and falling, a silent witness to the storm that had passed and to the one still brewing. In that moment, I made a promise. To that little bird. And to myself. This wasn't over. Not even close. Exactly at the 24-hour mark, Powell himself came to unlock my cell. He looked like he had aged a year in a single day, the lines on his face deeper, his eyes more haunted than before. Charges dropped, he said flatly, sliding the key into the lock. His voice was tired, almost hollow. Federal Lake Authority raised hell over that email. Whoever forged it, they did a solid job, but not solid enough to fool the real feds. As we made our way through the fluorescent-lit halls of processing, he leaned in slightly, voice low and raw. My boss is catching heat now. Seems Director Hargrove doesn't appreciate people using his agency's name for personal power trips. I wanted to say something, to thank him for the warning he tried to give, to acknowledge that he hadn't just stood by. But before I could, he turned and walked away. His shoulders sagged like a man who'd spent years compromising piece by piece until there was barely anything left. Outside, Derek was waiting. So was Susan, and a few others, 3 neighbors I barely knew until that moment. Their faces were a strange mixture of relief, exhaustion, and righteous fury. Pamela's party was disgusting. Susan spat as we drove away. She stood there giving a speech about standards and protecting the community from dangerous elements like she hadn't just tried to destroy someone's life. Half the damn neighborhood showed up, drinking her poisoned Kool-Aid like it was communion. But Derek had something far more valuable than rage. Evidence. Real, hard proof. He pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots from a shady tech guy's website, the same one who'd been seen coming and going from Pamela's house. His services included everything from document creation to email spoofing. "This is him," Derek said firmly. I got his license plate, his business address, the whole package. Breadcrumbs. A trail, clear as day, leading straight back to Pamela's desperation. When we pulled up to my house, I braced myself for more vandalism, more threats. But instead, I found something unexpected: a small "Welcome Home" banner taped to my front door, and a cooler of cold beer waiting on my porch with a handwritten note. "Not everyone believes her lies. Your real neighbors." It was simple, quiet, but it meant everything. Inside, the surprises kept coming. Notes had been slipped under my door, handwritten letters from neighbors I barely spoke to, each one sharing their own story about Pamela's reign of terror. Some apologized for signing her petition. Others offered support or thanked me for standing up when they couldn't. The tide was turning, slowly but unmistakably. That night, I sat on my porch with one of those beers, eyes fixed on Pamela's house across the street. Her party was dying down. Guests were leaving in small clusters, but I could still see her silhouette pacing back and forth in the window, scheming, planning her next move. That woman didn't know how to quit. Derek sat beside me, uncharacteristically quiet, until he finally spoke. "I let you down, man," he said, voice low. "When they cuffed you," I froze. I didn't do anything. I felt like a coward. I told him to let it go, that I understood, but he shook his head. "No, I have to make this right. I've been watching more than just her house. I've been digging into her tech guy, tracking his comms." He pulled out his phone again, showed me an intercepted email, something he wasn't supposed to have access to, but somehow did. "She's planning something bigger," he said. "She's trying to scrub your permit from the Lake Authority's database. Erase you entirely." As I read the message, my blood turned to ice. Pamela wasn't finished. This wasn't retaliation, it was escalation. But I didn't panic. I raised my beer in a slow, mocking toast to her house across the street. And I smiled, because she had no idea, no clue that I had the proof, the documents, the screenshots, the voices, to bring her entire little empire crashing down. Tuesday morning, I walked into the federal building with a folder that could sink a battleship. Inside were Susan's bank records, showing the money trail, Derek's surveillance photos, the forged email that put me behind bars, and the smoking gun, the contract tying Pamela to Integrated Waste Solutions, outlining their plan to turn Lake Silverpine into a private dumping ground. Director Hargrove himself met me, a seasoned man with weathered features and steel in his eyes. With each page he read, his expression darkened. 20 years I've protected this watershed," he said finally, voice calm but dangerous. "And now some suburban HOA wants to turn it into a landfill." By the time I left, he'd not only vowed to act, he handed me an invitation. Thursday's emergency HOA meeting, where federal investigators would be making an unexpected and very public appearance. The news broke Wednesday afternoon. Channel 7 opened with "Illegal dumping scandal rocks Crest Haven." Footage of hazmat crews pulling barrels from the lake ran on a loop. Pamela scrambled to save face, calling her own press conference. She stood before the cameras, trying to play the victim, claimed it was all a smear campaign orchestrated by a few troublemakers. But the media smelled blood. "Mrs. Warwick," one reporter shouted, "how do you explain your husband's name on these contracts? What about the toxic barrels found in the lake?" Another pressed. Pamela's polished mask cracked. On live TV, "I've done nothing but protect this community," she screamed. "These people don't understand what I've sacrificed." The meltdown went viral within hours. Suburban dictator meets public disgrace. Thursday's meeting was chaos. Standing room only. Federal agents lined the walls. Pamela sat at the head of the table, gavel in hand, trying to maintain control. "This is still an official HOA meeting," she declared. "I will maintain order." That's when Susan stood up, her voice ringing like tempered steel. "You poison our kids' lake for money. You fined us for inches while dumping chemicals into the water our children swim in." Then Tom stood. "You fined my kid $50 for leaving his bike in the driveway." Another neighbor. $300 for my garden gnome. Yet another. 800 because my car was the wrong shade of blue. The dam broke. Years of fear and silence erupted into fury. Pamela's grip on the gavel turned white-knuckled. But it was too late. The lead federal investigator spoke calmly, but his words were crushing. We've documented 17 violations of the Clean Water Act. The lake's eastern shore will remain uninhabitable for at least 5 years. The HOA president's signature appears on multiple authorizations. Pamela tried one last fake smile. This is a misunderstanding, she stammered. I was protecting property values. I didn't know. Susan cut her off. You knew. You knew when you shut down the lake. You knew when you had Ryan arrested. You knew when you signed those checks. The room erupted again. Pamela's poise dissolved. Her hair frizzed. Her hands shook, clutching her purse like a lifeline. The vote was unanimous. Pamela Warwick was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. Tom, now temporary president, brought down the gavel. Pamela exploded. You idiots, she shrieked, hurling the mic. I made this place. Without me, you're nothing. Security moved in as she continued ranting, her perfect suburban persona in tatters. Do you have any idea what you've done? My husband's business, our reputation, our lives. As they escorted her out, she turned and locked eyes with me. This is your fault, she hissed. You destroyed everything. I just smiled. No, Pamela, I said softly. You did that all by yourself. You made your choice the day you decided our lake, our shared piece of nature, was worth less than padding your bank account. But by Saturday, Lake Silverpine belonged to us again. The oppressive yellow lake closed signs were gone, torn down and replaced with bright, fluttering banners that read, "Welcome back." I'd organized what could only be described as the mother of all neighborhood celebrations. 3 pontoon boats lashed together into a floating stage, classic rock thundering from oversized speakers, and what felt like half of Crest Haven dancing and laughing on the open water. Even Tom showed up, beer in hand, smiling wide as his kids cast their fishing lines into the lake for the first time in years. First time they've smiled at this lake in 2 years, he said, raising his drink to me in a heartfelt salute. Susan brought a cake. Yes, a cake, shaped like a federal permit, complete with Director Hargrove's signature piped in frosting. When she raised her glass to toast, she said, "To Ryan, who reminded us that bullies only win when we let them." The cheer that rose up from the crowd was so loud, I'd bet it echoed all the way to Pamela's house, where someone had spotted moving trucks that morning. But what truly made it magical wasn't the music or the beer or even the base being grilled on open flames. It was the people, the diversity of the crowd. Neighbors who once avoided me were now laughing and sharing coolers. People who'd actually signed Pamela's ridiculous petition were now apologizing, cracking jokes about her over-the-top fines, even hugging old friends. The fisherman she'd once had arrested? He came too, brought a fresh catch and fed the crowd with a smile, flipping fish on the grill and telling stories about the good old pre-Pamela days. This lake, he said, flipping a golden base over hot coals, was always meant for everyone. That's what federal protection means. No HOA tyrant can steal it from us. Director Hargrove even showed up briefly, shaking hands, listening to stories, and promising that Lake Silverpine would be fully restored. 5 years, he said. That's how long the cleanup will take, but I promise it'll be worth it. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky and lake in hues of gold and deep crimson, I felt something I hadn't known in weeks: peace. But then, Derek found me. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by something serious. I need to show you something, he said quietly, pulling out his phone. Remember Pamela's tech guy? I've been monitoring his communications, just an old habit from when I worked with campus security on that hacking case back in college. He opened a message thread, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Pamela wasn't finished. She'd hired the same tech guy to hack into the federal database, erase my permit records, and wipe away every shred of evidence about the toxic dumping. She was trying to fabricate an entirely new story, one where I'd made everything up. The last message in the thread was from just a few hours earlier. Meet me at the lake access road. 10 p.m., bring your laptop. My gut twisted. All around me, people were dancing, laughing, feeling safe again. But Pamela? She was already planning her next desperate move. Still, as I looked around, Susan playing with her kids, Tom picking up trash without being asked, The fishermen already organizing next week's community fish fry. I realized Pamela might have one more move, but she'd already lost the war. The community she tried to bully into silence had found its voice. No hacker could erase that. Yet I knew I couldn't just let it go. If she succeeded in destroying federal evidence, everything we fought for could still fall apart. Derek caught my eye. He nodded. "I've got your back this time," he said. "Let's go catch a hacker." As Pamela met her tech guy by the lake, swearing to hack into the federal system, I was already one step ahead. The trap I'd laid was simple but effective. Sometimes old-school tricks still work best. While they sat in a car at the access road, laptop glowing in the dark, Derek and I were watching everything from my home office. I'd set up a honeypot, a decoy file labeled Silverpine Permit Original, uploaded to my cloud server. It looked official, tempting, just vulnerable enough to seem real to someone desperate. At 10:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. Someone had taken the bait. The second he opened the file, my system logged his IP address, MAC address, even captured screenshots of what he was doing. "Got him," I muttered as I watched the screen. Bill's tech guy was downloading the file, completely unaware that the file was rigged to record every keystroke and screen he touched. He wasn't even masking his IP. No VPN, no protection. Just pure arrogance and ignorance. And then it got better. He started editing the document, changing dates, forging signatures, trying to make it look like I had created a fraudulent permit. He's literally generating evidence of his own crime, Derek said, recording the screen as backup. But it didn't stop there. The hacker, using credentials Pamela had somehow gotten, likely through her husband's golfing connections, tried to access the actual federal database. That was his final mistake. Director Hargrove's team had been warned, and the moment he tried to log in, federal alerts went off. His connection was cut. His location tracked. Local law enforcement dispatched. Through my security feed, we watched as panic set in, furious typing, error messages, his screen filling with warnings. We even saw a notepad file pop up on his desktop with the message, "Pamela, this isn't worth it. They're tracing me right now." I didn't waste a second. I called Officer Powell directly and shared the live footage. "They're at the lake access road," I said. "Northwest corner. Blue Honda Civic, same one Derek saw earlier." Powell didn't even pause. "Federal cybercrime? Way above Pamela's husband's golf buddy's pay grade," he said with clear satisfaction. "Units are rolling." Derek and I ran to the window as flashing lights lit up the distant road, beams of flashlights dancing through the trees. My phone kept pinging. The hacker was trying to delete everything, clear history, remove logs, but it was too late. Every panicked keystroke was another nail in the coffin. 20 minutes later, Officer Powell called me back. "We got them both," he said. The tech guy started singing the second we mentioned federal charges. Said Pamela promised him 50 grand to fix the permit situation and erase all the toxic dumping records. I could hear Pamela shrieking in the background. "I want my lawyer. This is entrapment." Powell just laughed. "She tried to throw the laptop in the lake when we arrived. That's destruction of federal evidence, attempted cyber terrorism, conspiracy. She's going away for a long time." And just like that, it was over. Not with a whisper, not with a threat, but with the sound of handcuffs snapping shut under the stars. Pamela had finally done it. She'd gone from a petty HOA tyrant to a full-blown federal felon. And honestly, I couldn't help but laugh. After everything she had put us through, the ridiculous fines, the bogus arrests, the orchestrated smear campaigns, it was almost poetic. She outsmarted herself straight into a pair of shiny, government-issued handcuffs. The very next morning, Crest Haven woke up to something out of a TV drama. Federal agents were swarming Pamela's house, search warrants in hand. The entire neighborhood gathered like it was a street fair. People brought lawn chairs, travel mugs, even trays of coffee and boxes of donuts. Tom leaned over, offered me a chocolate glazed, and said, "Is this better than cable or what?" And honestly, it was. We watched as agents hauled out box after box, stacks of files, computers, hard drives, all likely loaded with proof of who knows how many scams she'd been running. At exactly noon, Pamela herself was marched out, hands cuffed behind her back. Her once perfect hair looked like it had fought a losing battle with a leaf blower, and her usual designer outfit had been replaced with something I'd describe as courtroom chic, minus the chic. When she saw us, The crowd, she absolutely lost it. "You'll regret this," she screamed, thrashing against the agents. "When your property values plummet, when this neighborhood falls apart, you'll beg me to come back." From somewhere in the crowd, Susan's voice rang out like a bell. "I think we'll manage." That was all it took. Laughter rippled through the bystanders like a wave. But the true mic drop moment came from the old fisherman she'd had arrested 2 years ago for unauthorized casting. He held up a freshly caught bass and called out, "Only thing tanking around here is your reputation, lady." The place erupted in applause as Pamela was driven off, still shrieking into the wind. Her reign of terror was finally over. But the party? Oh, it was just getting started. That same afternoon, Director Hargrove himself arrived with a team of federal environmental specialists. He addressed the growing crowd, his voice firm and full of promise. "The cleanup starts Monday," he announced. "But more importantly, we're putting permanent protections in place for Lake Silverpine. From this moment on, no HOA, no individual, no group, no one can ever claim jurisdiction over this lake again." The following weeks moved fast. Justice didn't just knock, it kicked the door in. Pamela's husband was indicted on federal conspiracy charges. All their assets frozen. Investigators dug into how much they profited from illegal dumping, and let's just say, it wasn't pocket change. And then there was Bill Hoffman, the sketchy tech guy who'd helped Pamela pull off half her cyber schemes. Turns out, he flipped. Made a deal to testify in exchange for a shorter sentence. "She paid me to fake complaints, forge documents, even invent violations," he admitted under oath. Said it was for the greater good of the neighborhood. "Sure, Bill. Whatever helps you sleep at night." His testimony uncovered a paper trail of forged emails, fake petitions, and digital sleight of hand that had led to at least 3 other families being wrongfully forced out. But not anymore. The community hit back, hard. Susan was elected HOA president in a landslide, running on a single promise: never again. Her first order of business? Erase every fine Pamela had issued over the last 5 years. We're talking over $200,000 returned to residents. Money collected for absurd reasons like mailbox font size or grass growing half an inch too high. Tom even got his $50 back for that ridiculous bike fine they gave his son. He didn't keep it. Instead, he donated it to a lake restoration fund. The fishermen started a weekend program for local kids, teaching them how to fish responsibly and take care of the lake. "This water belongs to everyone," he'd say, "and it's our job to protect it from people who think money matters more than mercury levels." And me? Somehow, I became a bit of a local legend, though I did my best to stay out of the spotlight. Director Hargrove offered me a seat on the Lake Silverpine Advisory Board. I only had one request: that some of our meetings take place on pontoon boats. "Gotta keep the spirit of the lake alive," I told him. The board's first recommendation? Install security cameras to prevent illegal dumping. The second? Monthly community events, no permits required. The message was clear. This lake was about joy, not control. 6 months later, I hosted the biggest community celebration the lake had ever seen. Over 500 people came: families, reporters, kids with fishing poles, even folks from nearby towns. But the moment that stayed with me was when I saw that little girl, the same one who once cried by the lake closed sign, catch her very first fish. Her scream of excitement echoed across the water, and I swear, I saw Tom discreetly wipe a tear from his eye. "This," Susan said, raising her drink, "this is what we fought for. Not just to get rid of Pamela, but to remember what community really means." As the sun dipped behind the now pristine waters of Lake Silverpine, Powell, yes, that Powell, off-duty and actually smiling, wandered over and said, "Heard Pamela's trying to start an HOA in prison. Wants to organize meal schedules and dress codes." He paused. Some people just never learn. We laughed. But under that laughter was something deeper. A quiet sense of peace. A victory. Of finally reclaiming our lives from tyranny. Paperclip tyranny, clipboard tyranny, the worst kind of tyranny. Pamela got 8 years for conspiracy, cyberterrorism, and environmental violations. Her husband got 12. Bill got 2 years and a lifetime ban from working with computers. But more importantly, Crest Haven got its soul back. As the party died down and the last boats drifted toward shore, Derek raised a toast. "To Ryan," he said, "who reminded us that backing up your files includes backing up your neighbors." The cheer that followed was loud enough to rattle the treetops. The next morning, a letter arrived that made me laugh out loud. The Federal Lake Authority was inviting me to speak at their annual conference. Apparently, our story was now required reading for trainees dealing with unauthorized authority claims over public lands. But the best part? A handwritten note from Director Hargrove. Your backup protocols saved a federal waterway. Ever consider a career change? I tucked the letter into my drawer and grabbed my fishing pole. Tom's kids were already at the lake. Susan was organizing another cleanup, and the water shimmered with that particular kind of peace you only earn after a long, hard fight. This was home. This was what community was always supposed to be, and it was worth every ounce of the battle. So, if you've got a Pamela in your life, someone inventing rules and using fear to keep people in line, here's the real secret. Document everything. Know your rights. And remember that tyrants and blazers are still just bullies. They depend on silence and ignorance to keep their grip. Take those away, and their empires collapse faster than a folding chair at a lake party. And if you're in your own HOA nightmare right now, drop a comment. Tell your story. Because the best way to fight suburban tyranny is to remind each other that we're not alone. Justice may take time, but with enough documentation and a good internet connection, it always shows up. This is HOA Exclusive Stories, turning everyday madness into entertainment gold. Subscribe and turn on those notifications. You don't want to miss what happens next.